Standoff seems to have ended with the return of the captured Indian pilot Abhinandan Vardhaman to India by Pakistan. The crisis, as you know, began after the terror attack in Pulwama in South Kashmir on the 14th of February this year. On the 26th of February, that is 12 days after the Pulwama attack, in which over 40 CRPF Jawans of India were killed, 12 Mirage 2000 jets of the Indian Air Force struck a Jaish-e-Mohammad training camp in Balakot in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province of Pakistan, across the line of control in Pakistan's heartland, as it were. India claimed that the camp was completely destroyed. However, there are several conflicting reports emerging from Pakistan and from elsewhere in the world. On the 27th, which is the following day after India struck the terror camp in Balakot, the Pakistan Air Force attacked India. Across the line of control, India claims that the Pakistanis tried to attack India's military formations and military installations in Jammu and Kashmir. While retaliating against the Pakistani strike, an Indian MiG-21 fighter jet was destroyed, and the pilot was captured by the Pakistani armed forces. On the 1st of March, the Indian pilot was released, and the two sides now seem to be de-escalating. There has been no military action between India and Pakistan since the 27th of February. However, there are so many ceasefire violations that are currently underway between India and Pakistan on the line of control. Both the armies and the BSF and the Rangers are actually using high caliber weapons, anti-aircraft guns and 105 mortar guns, etc. What is clear to us at this point of time is that there is no clear winner in this military confrontation, this military crisis between India and Pakistan. India claims that it shot down an F-16 fighter aircraft of the Pakistani Air Force, but the Pakistanis, of course, have refuted that Indian claim. India also says that its military action, its air attack on Balakot in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, killed a significant number of terrorists who were holed up in that terror camp. But again, the satellite imagery coming from various parts of the world seem to dispute that. Again, there are claims and counterclaims about that. Pakistan says that it downed more than one Indian aircraft, a claim again the Indian side refutes. So, if you were to ask me what is the balance at the end of this minor air battle in Jammu and Kashmir across the line of control, I would say it is who you choose to believe. There is absolutely no clarity on the gains and losses in material terms, at least. So, what are some of the claims, what are some of the questions and lessons that we can learn from this particular attack on Balakot and what ensued thereafter? I think first of all, the Indian action in Balakot has not achieved any strategic objective, as it were, even though there is a possibility that India could potentially repeat the same action, Balakot-like action in future as well. There is no clarity on the tangible results of this particular action against terrorists in Balakot. This also means that the initiating side should know very clearly what its strategic and tactical objectives are or war aims are before it sets out to carry out such an action. Did the Indian side have, so the question that we must ask is, did the Indian side have enough clarity about what it wanted to achieve by carrying out this strike against Pakistan, and was the Indian side willing to do what was necessary to achieve its war aims, and what price was India willing to pay in order to achieve what it wanted to achieve to begin with. In retrospect, to me at least, it looks as if it was a very hastily put together military operation without really going through the various action-reaction sequences that are necessary in a sort of military planning of this nature. Having said that, I think one could make the argument that India sent out a very clear signal to Pakistan that Balakot-like actions are possible in the days to come in future if Pakistan does not crack down on terror. In other words, India seems to have shed its strategic constraint on the question of terror, on the question of cracking down on terrorists, wherever they are located, be it in POK or elsewhere in Pakistan. The second, I think, lesson is that the Pakistani retaliation using fighter jets seems to have caught India by complete surprise. So did the Indian war planners simulate adequately what might follow their first strike in Balakot and how they would respond to that? Or did they underestimate the Pakistani resolve and response and therefore called off any further retaliation when the Pakistanis actually struck back? Or was the only objective of the Indian side was to strike back when the Pulwama attack happened and then defend against the Pakistani retaliation as it were? We have no clarity. The government has not really come out with a comprehensive sort of argument about what was the action that was carried out and what were the objectives behind that. But we can only at this point of time engage in this sort of a guesswork as it were, intelligent guesswork as it were. I think the one serious lesson that, at least to me, seems to be very clear from this episode is that in the fog of war, a lot of uncertain developments can take place, whereby one would either have to move into the next level of escalation or would have to call off the escalation completely. Let's take the example of the capture of the Indian pilot by the Pakistanis. If India had not foreseen that, one would have to sort of argue that this happened in the sort of confusion relating to this escalation, and then Indian pilot was captured by the Pakistani side. The option for India was then to sort of de-escalate. It just could not go any further. So you're looking at in a sort of standoff of this kind, military standoff of this kind, it is mired with a lot of uncertainties. In the fog of war, a lot of uncertain things sort of trigger themselves to the fore. The next lesson probably is that the Indian war planners were perhaps trying to stretch the limits of the 2016 surgical strikes. Given the fact that the Pakistanis did not respond, they did not even acknowledge, they neither acknowledged nor responded to the surgical strikes of September 2016, it is possible that the war planners in Delhi thought that they could probably stretch the limits of what was achieved in 2016. But in retrospect, one has to say that it may not have panned out in the way that the Indian side planned it, if that were to be the case. I think the next lesson for me is that by carrying out this audacious air attack in Balakot, deep inside Pakistan, India wanted to create a new military normal with Pakistan. Had Pakistan not responded to this audacious airstrike of the Indian Air Force, or if they had feigned ignorance of this particular attack, India would have succeeded in setting in stone this particular military normal between India and Pakistan, that India can carry out military strikes deep inside heartland Pakistan and it would go unresponded to. So from a Pakistani point of view, therefore, it was simply impossible for the Pakistani side not to respond to this sort of an operation inside Pakistan, because if Pakistan were to do that, it would have meant that India would then carry out similar strikes in future. So this military normal, India wanted to establish that, the Pakistanis wanted to push back that. So to me, this was a fallout of that sort of a calculation, as it were. More importantly, I think when the Indian war planners called it, when the Indian side called it a non-military pre-emptive strike, I assume that it must have bothered the Pakistani side, because pre-emptive strike is pregnant with a lot of possibilities. Clearly, it comes from the American playbook, but when you use preemptive as opposed to the language that you used in 2016, which was more retaliatory in nature, the Pakistanis, I think, had to respond to that, because preemptive would mean that India could carry out any operation at any point of time, saying that there is something that is going to happen in near future. The Pakistanis wanted to avoid that eventuality being forced upon them. I think the next lesson really is that the patience of the international community and the time available for military action is not unlimited in the India-Pakistan context, precisely because the two sides are nuclear weapon states. The international community, in the wake of a terror attack against India, could possibly try and wait for a few days to let India vent its steam, vent its national anger, as it were, against Pakistan. But once that venting is over, some initial action is undertaken, the international community would step in. And you saw these statements coming from various parts of the world, and the international media looking very closely at what was happening between India and Pakistan. All of that basically showed that the international community's patience runs out after the initial period. I think in future conflict, the two sides will probably keep that in mind as well. Equally important is the fact that PR campaigns and information dissemination has a great impact on outcomes in limited conflicts. So the question to ask is, did Imran Khan really play his cards better than Mr. Narendra Modi? While the former was clearly sending messages both to the Indian side and to the international community and his own domestic audience, of course, the Indian Prime Minister was busy campaigning in various parts of the country. So it looked like the Imran Khan's PR machinery had the upper hand during this particular conflict. And more importantly, I think by returning the pilot immediately after capturing him, immediately meaning in a few days' time after capturing him, it looked like Imran Khan gained a moral advantage over India. I don't think Imran Khan decided to send the pilot back to India because of any international pressure, nor was he concerned about the Geneva Conventions, all of that. Yeah, eventually all of that would have kicked in, but he didn't have to return this pilot soon after he was captured, within a few days' time. So I think all of this, to my mind, tells me that Imran Khan probably had the upper hand in sort of managing the messaging, as it were, at every level of this game. So what that tells us is that de-escalation, I think the lesson that comes out of that is that de-escalation requires a certain amount of face saving for both sides in this age of social media. But I think the most important question to ask at this point of time is whether this crisis and the attack on Balakot by the Indian Air Force, will that force Pakistan to crack down on terror? There is absolutely no evidence to suggest that. So if there is no evidence to suggest that Pakistan will genuinely crack down on terror after this episode, to that extent, this mission, this operation is a complete failure. On the other hand, one could make the argument that India could repeat what it did on the 26th of February. By going into Pakistan, it attacked a terror camp. So the argument is that if Pakistan does not genuinely crack down on terror, India could repeat what it did, notwithstanding the fact that there would be consequences, that there are likely to be consequences to that. The consequences being that India will have to go through this action-reaction cycle all over again without any clear victory at the end of the day. Finally, let's take a brief look at the various rungs of the India-Pakistan escalation ladder since the two countries went nuclear in 1999, and see what lessons we can draw from this. I think at rung 1, you're looking at sub-conventional operations, which is the existence of terrorism prompted by the Pakistani side. At rung 2, you're looking at cross LOC firing, which you see happening from time to time between the two sides. I think the third rung in this escalatory ladder is surgical strikes and quick raids from across the line of control or across the line of control for punitive purposes. Now, let me remind you that such surgical strikes and punitive raids are pretty normal and routine in the India-Pakistan context. I think the fourth rung in this escalation ladder is precision air strikes and limited dogfight thereafter, something that we just witnessed in the past few days. And the fifth rung in this escalation ladder is perhaps what we witnessed after the attack on the Indian Parliament in December 2001. So the 2001-2000 crisis and the amassing of several hundred thousands of troops along the international border between India and Pakistan and the line of control between India and Pakistan is perhaps the fifth rung in this escalation ladder. The final rung, of course, is the Kargil type limited conflict that we saw soon after the two sides went nuclear in 1998. So these are the 6 rungs. Of course, you can go further and talk about bigger conflicts. You can probably have an all-out conventional conflict. You can have a nuclear conflict. They are the next rungs, but I just want to focus on these 6 rungs that we are familiar with so far and what lessons we can learn from these 6 rungs of the escalation ladder, as it were. I think if you examine these 6 rungs very closely, you will find that both sides exercised a great deal of restraint despite provocation at every level, be it during the 2001-2002 period, be it during the Kargil conflict, be it during the recent dogfight, or during the immediate aftermath of the surgical strikes. I think there was a certain amount of restraint. Talking about the recent limited air attacks by both sides, they made sure that the air attacks did not take place along the international border. They ensured that it sort of remained contained to the skies above the line of control in Jammu and Kashmir. I think the second lesson that we can learn from this escalation ladder is that there is a keen desire to limit the conflict spatially and temporally. Spatially because, as I just said, during the recent conflict, you're looking at a very limited space where the fighting was taking place. During the Kargil conflict, there was a clear decision on the Indian side that they would limit the conflict only to that particular sector where it had to take the territory back from the Pakistani side. Temporally, because you're looking at a very limited span of time within which both sides decide that we have to finish off the fighting at that point of time. So I think both spatially and temporally there is a certain amount of desire to keep the limit, to keep the conflict limited. I think thirdly, the third lesson really is that signaling the international community and potential third-party mediators has been constant in all of this, during all of these crisis situations. So from the Kargil war crisis onwards, Kargil conflict onwards, through the 01-02 crisis, Mumbai crisis, the recent crisis, I think there has been a intention to sort of signal the third-party mediators and the international community. The final lesson, as it were, from this is that there is a certain amount of intermingling of domestic politics and foreign policy, and that is probably also why the conflicts take place in the first place. So the conflicts are a function of, in many ways, the intermingling of the domestic politics and sort of foreign policy, India's foreign policy towards Pakistan, and how domestic politics in India, especially the election season, has an impact on that. I think that has a certain impact on the sort of crisis that takes place between India and Pakistan. So I think anyone who wants to look at the India-Pakistan crisis and the various ranks of escalation that we've had so far will need to keep in mind domestic audiences and domestic politics and domestic costs, as it were, in both the countries.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.